Is Litecoin going to be the stellar investment of 2019? Well, I'm going to cover off some of the recent news stories and think about some of the things that are happening in the Litecoin ecosystem overall to try and answer that question. The first big story, of course, is one you've probably heard about already, but Litecoin sponsored the UFC. So this was a very prolific and famous fight that did happen, and the Litecoin logo was right there on the mat the entire time. Apparently the UFC is this thing where two people fight with each other and do stuff. You might be surprised to find out that I am not a big fan of sports or the UFC, but you don't have to be a fan of sports to understand how important that is for branding, because millions of people watched that on pay-per-view. That is actually really big. You have a great exercise in brand awareness, in mainstream awareness, in introducing Litecoin to people who have never heard about Litecoin before. I'm not saying they're going to run out the door and buy Litecoin like, oh, dude, I saw Litecoin on the UFC, man. I got to go buy a bunch of it. No, not all the couple million people who watched it are going to think like that. Maybe a couple people did. But the idea is branding, branding, branding. They've now heard about it. Imagine all the people who probably heard about Litecoin for the first time in that situation. That's pretty big. And even if they don't go out and look up anything about Litecoin afterwards, the next time they hear about it, and they're going to hear about it again, they're going to, oh, Litecoin. Oh, yeah, I saw that in a UFC match. What's that Litecoin stuff again? You got to tell me about that. Now they've got the brand awareness. Now they know about it. This is the same reason why all big brands just throw tons of money at stuff like this, because it's just getting the name in front of eyes, getting the logo in front of eyes. So it's pretty big when it comes down to it. Now, something you do have to keep in mind too, the Litecoin Foundation did pay for this. Obviously, the sponsorship did cost a lot of money, and even though the metrics, they did a full report on the metrics, look pretty good in terms of social media engagement, all these things. Maybe they could have found a better sponsor. Perhaps you could debate the semantics of, well, was the UFC the best sponsorship? I'd argue it was actually a pretty good one in terms of a big sporting event. Maybe next time they can do a yacht or something like that, or a race car or whatever, but same idea. Get a big sports team or event to sponsor like that, and it creates amazing brand awareness. And there's lots of little stories about how Litecoin adoption continues to grow with merchants. We could look at like Surf Air, for example. This is a private flight company operating in the west coast of the United States. Then there's a Brazilian supermarket chain called Oasis. They're now accepting Litecoin, Bitcoin, and Bitcoin Cash, which is pretty big when you think, okay, supermarkets accepting that. Brand awareness, great. You see all those pay with Litecoin signs when you walk into the shop, but this is far from being the titan of the Brazilian supermarket industry. It's only a small company operating in Rio de Janeiro, but it's still pretty cool when it comes down to it. Every merchant, every shop, every person, it all counts when it comes to the adoption of cryptocurrencies. One person at a time, guys. One shop at a time. That is how it's done. We also have, for example, a Singapore shopping center. They added a new Bitcoin and Litecoin ATM, so just the two currencies on there. But again, great brand awareness for Litecoin. Taking a look under the hood, so not so much at the branding and the marketing and merchant adoption and all that stuff, there have been some other interesting things happening with Litecoin recently. For example, we see the Lightning Network on Litecoin passing over 100 nodes, which is a great step forward for the Lightning Network on Litecoin. It's excellent to see it growing. And another important piece of the Litecoin Lightning Network framework, CoinGate.com, they are going to be bringing 1,000 merchants to Litecoin Lightning. It's a mouthful, isn't it? Obviously, things like atomic swaps have not gone away. They've only got better as time goes on. So that lets Litecoin be easily swapped with Bitcoin, for example, in an atomic kind of way, that is. Then we have talks about fungibility coming to Litecoin. So essentially, we could see a privacy feature added for Litecoin for the sake of increasing fungibility. Now, unfortunately, there would be no way that they're imagining any way for it to be default for every transaction. So it is going to be something that's going to be optional, like we have with Zcash, for example, or some of the other cryptocurrencies like PivX. So it won't be privacy all the time with Monero and their rig signatures. The idea here is that it's a decentralized community. They want to give people the option. Do you want to do a private transaction, or do you want to do a transaction that everyone can see? There's use cases for both of them, so important to have the option, I think. But don't expect this to happen overnight. Charlie Lee has been throwing the idea around for quite some time now, and we haven't seen it come to fruition yet. So don't hold your breath waiting for privacy features on Litecoin, even though they're probably going to happen one of these days. And while it's not exactly a news story, but remember, Litecoin did buy 10% of a German bank, and that'll help them provide all kinds of things that really wouldn't be possible without having that stake in a bank. Things that will let them drive mainstream adoption of cryptocurrencies, remittances, lending, microfinance, e-commerce, all of that stuff can be done in a much easier fashion via having a piece of that important part of the traditional world's architecture. Overall, Litecoin remains good, sound money with a very strong network of miners backing it up. It is, of course, the #1 script mined coin, so there's a very low danger of having a network attack like we did see happen with Ethereum Classic. Remember, Ethereum taking all of the ETH hash power, or the lion's share of it, so Ethereum Classic was left with a very small amount, which made it very vulnerable to attack. It would be much more difficult to attack Litecoin. Considering that currently we see Litecoin with around 1/10 of the price that it did have at its all-time high, it does seem to be an interesting investment opportunity, but a lot of other cryptocurrencies can say the same things. A lot of them have seen their values decrease by 70, 80, 90, 95, 99%. So is it the cheapest one in terms of overall losses in the bear market? No, you could find a cheaper cryptocurrency, but Litecoin does have a lot going for it. It has a very strong community, growing merchant adoption, all that fun kind of stuff. But the real thing that could make Litecoin a very interesting investment in 2019 is the Litecoin halvening. So this is when the block reward is going to drop by 50%. So all of a sudden, Litecoin is going to become very rare very quickly. When you add that into all the merchant adoption, we see it listed on more exchanges, etc., 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 you kind of understand the power of Litecoin to continue moving forward in spite of tough market conditions, and it does offer a very interesting investment opportunity, even if it gets back to the previous all-time high, and that's all the higher it ever goes. That's pretty good for a cryptocurrency that has very high volume and a very big and rather good community when it comes down to it. And the interesting thing too, look back on Litecoin. Litecoin's around 7 years old. And when you think about that, it's been around for a really long time. Can you just stop to think for a second? 7 years from now, who do you think's still going to be here? Bitcoin Satoshi Vision or Litecoin? My money would be on Litecoin. Personally, I feel like a lot of coins aren't going to last 7 years, but I feel like Litecoin has enough of a community, enough of a market share, etc., that it could have this real strong staying power in the long term, and that in 2019 in particular, we could see some very interesting price movements on it, especially if we see an overall market recovery. But that Litecoin halvening, that could be a real catalyst for the price later in the year. It's about 200 days away at the time of recording this video. Anyway, just my two chickens, Charlie Lee's, my two Charlies. You say that, my two Charlies? Those are just my two Charlies. Doesn't have quite the same ring, does it? Those are just my two Satoshis on what is happening with Litecoin right now. You will let me know your thoughts on Litecoin, the future of Litecoin, current merchant adoption, etc., all that fun stuff down below in the comment section. Thank you so much for taking the time out of your day to come over here and watch this video. You guys are amazing. I love you all. The cryptocurrency community is absolutely top notch and super awesome. So thank you guys for continuing to support the channel. And of course, if you like this video, a thumbs up would be supremely appreciated. And of course, if you're new around here, subscribe to the channel, hit the notification bell to stay up to date with what is happening in crypto and know when I put out a new video. Long live the blockchain, and peace out till next time.